Hello, and welcome to my review of the latest Christopher Nolan epic, Oppenheimer. Today we're going to be running through what this movie is about, what worked, what didn't, and where it sits on the sliding scale. Some of Christopher Nolan's movies you may be familiar with are the Dark Knight trilogy, Interstellar, Inception, and if you've got the ability to comfortably tell someone what the second law of thermodynamics is, then you probably like Tenet as well. What's fast become one of Christopher Nolan's defining characteristics is his joy and delight in playing with time in his films. Oppenheimer is no different. This movie could have been told in a standard way from beginning to end, but there's multiple timelines. It's a non-linear story. So you get to see what's happening when Oppenheimer's young, when he's older, when he's a middle-aged man, and basically his whole life in a snapshot throughout the film. So that leads nicely into what worked well in this film. While watching this, it's easy to forget how complex it is to put together a story like this. You can watch movies where they play with time, they go back and forwards, but it's always quite jarring. It always feels like you're taking a little bit out of the movie. But somehow Christopher Nolan manages to craft this in such a way that it never feels like it's distracting from the story, it never feels out of place, and it always feels like you're engaged and really involved. This movie is 3 hours long, but it doesn't feel 3 hours. One of the reasons I think that is because it's never quite still, not for very long. Throughout the whole movie, there's a constant music that's playing. There's even quiet moments you'd expect to be just a casual conversation. There's a constant energy in the music that makes you feel like it's progressing and moving. The scenes don't last for very long. You'll jump from one scene to the next in almost like dreamlike shots, which give the impression that you're just kind of floating through the life of Oppenheimer. And the music itself, I was convinced that Hans Zimmer was the one doing this music because it sounds exactly like him. I'm pretty sure when Christopher Nolan sat down with the composer, he said, hey, I couldn't get Hans for this one, but just so you know, I want you to do it just like he would. And it sounds exactly like him. What really brings this whole film together is the cast. Cillian Murphy is beyond amazing. He plays this character in such an intense way, and when you watch this on the big screen and an IMAX or a really massive screen, you get to just see his face close up. His way of portraying emotion just through almost a blank stare, the intensity of it all, you really feel that there's something underneath. And it gives the impression that his character is someone who just was very thoughtful, very contemplative, didn't always share what he was thinking, but there was so much beyond the surface. Robert Downey Jr. was just off the charts amazing as well. It was so refreshing to see him do something that wasn't Iron Man. Iron Man is a classic character, but he's doing it for so many years. I think we all forgot what his acting ability really was. I found his character just delightful, and the way he played it, I'm just so excited to see what he does next. I hope he gets into more roles just like this. The way that they portray Oppenheimer viewing the world is almost a music, something you could feel more than understand and learn. And this portrayal, I think, has to just be the definitive portrayal. There's no reason to make any other film about Oppenheimer's life except this one. Christopher Nolan is always known to be quite practical, but there are visual effects in this that I think are used in such an expert way that they don't take you out of the film and they feel real, they feel grounded. The crowning achievement of this all is, like I mentioned before, just the craftsmanship. Christopher Nolan is beyond us mere mortals. I have no idea how he was able to put this together. The complexity of putting something like this in the way it's told is just mind-blowing. And he clearly loves telling stories this way, but the way he does it means that it's so engaging all the time. You're never bored. You're never tired of what you're seeing. Some of the things that didn't work for me were, there's Florence Pugh's character who plays one of his mistresses and is pretty much 90% of this film, her role is just to be there naked. I felt that was a bit unnecessary. It took me a little bit out of the story. I know that in these kinds of things, I can understand why he was going for it because it kind of comes back as a theme later on. But I felt like when it wasn't as impactful as I think he was planning. And the actual scene where they have wild seizures was so weird. Something about it was just so weird and awkward. I'm never a fan of those kinds of scenes anyway. I think it must be so weird for an actor to do that. But the way it was put together just didn't work. It felt like it needed space to breathe, or it needed something to kind of build up towards it, or it just felt like it was kind of wedged in there and then forced. And then all of a sudden you're getting this, historical line in a very weird context, which kind of just made it a bit more comedic than anything. But I just felt like altogether, you took that out of the film, This isn't really an R-rated film except for that scene. There's like 1 or 2 swear words. I think it would have been more accessible to a lot more people if they had just taken that scene out. The other thing about this was the actual explosion. Because of Christopher Nolan's love for practical effects, they actually replicated, in I'm sure the best they could, the atomic bomb. The problem being, I don't know if it was because how they described the atomic bomb to be, or it's because it's just really impossible to replicate the atomic bomb. But when it actually did go off, when the explosion happened, it didn't look as grand in scale. I'm going to run through some of the spoilers. There are just things that I just think was so epic about this movie that I want to talk to you about. So if you don't want to know these spoilers, skip this chapter, go to the end, look at how I'd rate this movie, and come back to this chapter later once you've seen the movie to see what I have to say about it. So you've been warned. As you're watching this movie, it feels like it's building up to the atomic bomb being the thing of the film. And of course it is, what he's known for. It's the major element. It's like, what do you want to see him like? And I kept on thinking to myself, they're building up to this. There's such a momentum. And this is what we came to see, is the explosion. And then the explosion happens. And it wasn't, like I said, that intense. When the movie really changed for me was what happened after the explosion. They mentioned some of the people coming out of the first screens of the film said it's like a horror movie. And after that explosion happens, the way that Oppenheimer deals with it and the way that they visually show him seeing the world is like a horror movie. It was so intense. The scene where he's giving a speech to a bunch of people who are celebrating the fact that he's done this amazing thing. They're laughing and they're happy and they're crying, but there's snapshots, there's moments where bright flashes and people's faces are peeling, and he's walking and he stands and he looks down and he stood into a burnt charcoal carcass. And the way that scene is done, even talking about it now and remembering it, is sending chills through my body. It was so amazingly done. I loved it. It scared me, it freaked me out, and it made me really feel so much empathy for Oppenheimer. It makes you realize the weight that this man had now been carrying. How do you deal with this? How do you manage the fact that you've created this thing that will destroy thousands of lives? This is later emphasized when he sits down with the President of the United States, and he's there to congratulate him. His face is on Time magazine, and he goes in, and Oppenheimer just feels depressed. You can see he's just been like overwhelmed. And as he's sitting there talking to the president, he says, I just feel like I've got blood on my hands. And the president looks at him and waves his little handkerchief to him, and he says, boo-hoo, basically, and tells him, no one cares about the man who created the bomb. I'm the one who decided to push the button and kill those people. And as he's leaving, one of the classic lines I feel of this movie is, get that crybaby out of here. It just puts into perspective what this is and what's involved when people decide to make these grand scale decisions. All right, so now we've chatted about that. Let's see where this sits in the sliding scale. This movie by Christopher Nolan definitely sits in the top tier for me. It is a wonderfully crafted movie. It is extremely well done. I would be putting it a lot higher up if it wasn't for some of the awkward, weird scenes that he put in there. But besides that, it still is an amazing film. This isn't my favorite movie by Christopher Nolan, but it does sit up there this year with some of the best films that have come out so far. So hey, this little guy holding his thumb up, crossing the screen right now, he's going on to ring a bell. I mean, you can ring a bell too if you want. You just got to push the little button and you'll get notified every time I put out another one of my videos. Thank you for coming to visit. It's always lovely to have you here. You're always welcome, and I will see you next time.